this computer. Coolio. Just drag this over here. All right, well, we'll just be starting in a few minutes. Let me make sure the stream is up. That is nice. Okay. Ba-da-da-da-da. All right, it's around 3. Let's see. Let's wait a few more minutes before starting. Well, anyway, for whoever's here, what I would do right now is I'd head over to linode.com. We actually have, if you just go to our hacker resources, actually, at go.admh.tech/resources, you can go ahead and see there will be a Linode link here. You can go over there. However, you can also get $100 of free credit by going to linode.com/lp/brand-free-credit. And then just go ahead and create an account there. We'll be using Linode, first of all, because they're sponsoring, and also because they're really easy to use. So go ahead and create that while we wait. You'll be needing it later in this workshop. All right, anyways, for you guys that just joined us, just while we're waiting for people to settle in, for James to finish up, just head over to linode.com/lp/brand-free-credit. That'll get you $100 of Linode credit. Just go ahead and set up your account. Now you will need a credit card though, but they won't charge you. So yeah, go ahead and get that set up. We'll be using that in our workshop.
All right, everyone, I'm back. Thank you for tuning into our workshop. If you're on YouTube, hello there. If you're on Zoom, hello too. We'll be getting started shortly.
Yeah. So essentially what we're going to be going through this workshop is just how to get a basic server set up, just securing it, as well as setting up a really basic web server. We'll also be going around some of the Linux stuff and the terminology that some people use, as well as some fun utilities. Now this can go really this will go really well with the domain.com domain that you guys are getting free with MLH, since you can use your Linode server to host your website. So yeah. All right. I think we're good to go. James, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good to go. I just realized I put the wrong link on Discord, apparently, to the workshop.
All right. Well, yeah, sorry about that, guys. We might be sometimes interrupted a bit, but we will try to get this interruption free. So yeah, so if you guys have not created an account, go ahead and create an account, but I'm going to go ahead and just log into my account here over at linode.com. Now, this doesn't need to be a linode.com, right? If you have a DigitalOcean account, if you have a Vultr account or anything else, that's perfectly fine. You guys can always just use those accounts. It's not going to be that much different. All right, but the first thing we're going to do is deploy a server. So a server is kind of like a computer. Well, it is a computer. But like for these cloud hosting services, what essentially do, you're renting a computer for however long you're running it for. Most of them charge you by the minute. So it's really affordable if you just need to do something really quickly. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and go with just a Linode. And go ahead and just switch this to Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. This is the latest version of Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a very popular Linux distribution for servers, for desktops. Basically, what a Linux distribution is, it's kind of like a set of like a company or an organization has kind of curated a set of software that you'll be able to use. And some of them are designed very differently, but one of the most popular ones that people use is Ubuntu. So that's what we're going to be using for this workshop. Next is the region. So Linode has plenty of regions, but since we're in Canada, we might as well just choose Toronto. And then for our cases, just a nanode is actually really sufficient for a simple web host or something. So if you just go ahead and go with nanode, it's only $5 a month actually. If you're going with the $100 free credit. Oh wait, no, it expires in 2 months. So I mean, you might as well go all in if you're doing that. But if you're just using a regular server, about 1 GB of RAM and 1 CPU and 25 GB of storage is plenty. So let's just create a label. It doesn't really matter. This is just for us, so we can just call this MasseyHacks-workshop and enter a root password. So a root password is kind of like the administrator account on Windows, except it's actually a lot more. Even in Windows, when you have an administrator account, it still asks you, right, if you want to do this as an administrator. But root, if you just do something with the root account, it doesn't ask you, it just does it. So this is a password you want to be very strong, and ideally you shouldn't even remember it. Like, it should be pretty random. You generally don't use the root account. You'll create a separate account for you, for yourself, that can kind of use the root account at times. So I'll get to what that means in a second. So let's just go ahead and generate a password here. Let me just type that in. For now, if you're following along here, just make sure you're saving that somewhere because you will need it just for a few minutes. All right, and then after, we can go ahead and create it. So I'm just gonna pull this over. There we go, okay. So we're good here. So now, what we want to do is now it gives us an IP address, right? So you guys might be wondering how we can actually connect to this server, and I think James can tell you guys how we can connect to these remote servers.
Right, so to connect to these servers, you need to use something called SSH. So SSH stands for Secure Shell. So this lets you create like a remote connection instance to your server that is secured, and it lets you kind of type in commands that interface with the server. So if you've ever seen one of those like cheesy hacker movies where they have like text scrolling along on like a terminal screen, this is exactly what we're doing, right? We're establishing a terminal instance to the server so that we can tell it what to do and kind of interact with it. Now, SSH is a text-based protocol, so all your commands will be done through typing text. There will not be a graphical user interface for you to click on. Most modern operating systems already have SSH built in, so if you're using a recent Windows version, think 1903 and above, you should be able to just open command prompt or PowerShell and just type in SSH, and you should be good to go. If you don't, or you would like a more upgraded experience, there's actually a really great piece of software called Termius. So Termius has client apps on many platforms, even like iPhone and like Android, right? And it syncs all of your servers across, so you can pick up right where you left off on your phone or iPad. And it comes with the GitHub Student Developer Pack that MLH talked about today.
Yeah. So we're just going to go ahead and do this with Termius, but this is going to be the exact same as just doing it in Windows. We can just go ahead and go to this top portion here. We can just type SSH root at, and then now we're just going to take the IP address here. So it's 172.105.107.119. We can copy that and head it over back to Termius and just paste that in. So to connect this will basically ask the authenticity of this host. Now, you don't need to worry about this too much, but this is essentially a way that you can make sure that you're actually connecting to the server that you want to connect to. There are a lot of security vulnerabilities that can kind of attack that. So that's why you want to verify this if this is a production system. But because it's a workshop, we can just assume that it's okay. Let's go ahead and just click yes here. And then now let's type in the root password that you set when you create the server. So go ahead and confirm this. You can see that it is now logged in. So welcome to this very beautifully designed system here, right? You can see this is all text. Now, one of the very first things that you want to do actually is just to make sure that if you have any updates, to install them. So here we have some updates here. So we're gonna actually save that for later though, because I kind of want to explain some of the basic Linux things that you might want to know. So again, remember, we are the root user. So this means that we can do anything we want, and the system will not ask us to confirm. Like, unless you specifically ask it to ask you to confirm, it will literally just do whatever. So you could delete your whole system and it will go ahead and do that happily without even asking you. So one of the biggest differences between Linux and Windows is that the file system layout is really different. Now, for all of those, all you guys who have Macs, you guys will actually be pretty familiar with this. But for Windows, you may know that there are letter drives. Right? We have like C drive, D drive, E drive, or whatever. But with Linux, what you have is actually just slash. So as you can see here, I'm just listing the slash directory. The slash directory is the root of all other directories. So if you want to mount a drive and you want to access a drive, you actually create a new directory inside slash, and then you kind of create a link between your hard drive and that new directory you created. All right, so that's a really big difference that people sometimes struggle with. But just remember that there are no drive letters. And kind of going off of that is the concept that everything is a file. So, you know, in Windows, right, if you want to go with like a mouse or you want to look at your keyboard, you go to Device Manager, right? But in Linux, everything's a file. So you can actually directly access your mouse by going to /dev. And you can see all these devices. So these are virtual files that allow you to communicate with your devices. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's kind of the design methodology of the Linux file system. So literally, just remember that everything is a file, and that slash is kind of the parent of everything. All right, so let's just go through some of these folders. A lot of these are actually common to all Linux distributions. The first thing I've already gone over is dev, of course. So these are your devices, anything you plug into your computer, or even things that you might not plug in, but should be accessible, like your CPU and stuff. Some parts of your CPU are also accessible through dev. Now let's also look at /home. So /home is where users except root have their home directories. So if you're on Windows, for example, you'll have like the C users and then your username, right? So that's kind of the same thing with /home. If you're on Mac OS, it's going to be /users. So this is where all the users files will be created and stored. Then root is the root users folder. So if we go ahead and type /root, there's nothing in there yet, right? But if you can see here in your shell, you have actually a tilde here. So this indicates that you're actually at your home directory. So in this case, it's root. If I just go ahead and touch a file, which is kind of to create an empty file, and now I list /root, you'll see the test is there. However, I can also just list a tilde, and that's also an alias for my home directory. Okay. /etc is over here, and this actually usually are all the configuration files for a lot of the systems services. And then after we have /var. So /var is kind of like a little mixed mash of a lot of stuff, but it's essentially files that are unique to your system. So these will be like log files created by applications, or you'll also have your web root usually in /var. So generally, if you're looking for any sort of non-configuration file as part of a service, it'll usually be in /var. Now we have a few other ones. We have /user and /srv is not in here, /opt. Those are just generic directories. /opt is sometimes still used to store optional software. User is kind of the opposite of var. User are /usr is basically a directory where you store files that are not unique to the system. So this will generally be like libraries or like default configuration or stuff, where if you set that as read-only, your system will still work fine. So those are kind of the basic ones. There are a lot more, but that's all you need to know for now. So one more thing that you might notice here is, let's go ahead and just list this again. List /var again. You can see there are actually different kind of highlights, right? You have said like crash and temp is like highlighted like a green color, and we have a whole bunch of other different colors. So these actually correspond to something called file permissions. So you might not be too familiar with these with Windows and Mac, but these are actually really important in Linux. And James, do you want to kind of go over what file system permissions are?
Yep, so file system permissions in Linux are done through something called octal notation. So there's 3 numbers, 777, and those correspond to different groups of users. So each 7 corresponds to a group, and they're actually a sum of numbers. So the first 7 is the user, right? So if you were the person who created a file, that 7 would apply to you. And the next 7 applies to the group. So you'll see that in Linux, right? You can create groups of users. So this makes it really easy for you to kind of control whole groups of people. So say if you had like a web development team, you'd want to put all of the web developers in the web developer group so that you can give them access to, say, a folder to access websites. Now, this also plays into a role when you have software on your on your system that needs to access these files together and kind of work together. So a good example of this is the www-data group that we'll elaborate on further. And the last 7 is for all other people. So that would give you access to everyone. And the way octal notation works is that there are actually a sum of numbers. So it's you add them all together, right? So the first one is the number 1, and that stands for execute. So a user with an octal sum of 1 would have the ability to kind of like execute files. And 2 is write, and that lets you kind of like create folders and like edit things and write to the disk. 4 is for read. Read lets you read the file, right? That lets you kind of like open it up and inspect it and read the contents of the thing. So 777 means that everyone has all permissions to the file. And of course, you can play around with this to have something like 766, 744, or anything like that to make more granular controls on the permissions.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, so we can actually look at some of these notations here. So we just do list-l. What we can see here is actually a textual-based representation of the current file. So we can see test here, and it has RW, R, and R. So this means that the root user can read and write, the root group can read, and everyone else can read as well. All right, but let's go ahead and just list /var here, and we can see that wherever we have this this crash folder here, we can see that we can always execute. See, everyone can execute this. Sorry, crash right here, right? We have full 7.7 permissions here. So whenever it's highlighted, so for most systems, whenever it's highlighted green, this means that it has 7.7 permissions. And the reason it's highlighted is because you generally actually don't want 7.7 permissions. That means that literally anyone could do anything. Usually you'll have either 7.7.5 or 7.5.5. So yeah, so does anyone have any questions about just the file system layout or the file system permissions?
So if you guys have a question, feel free to type it either in the YouTube chat or in the Zoom chat. We'll be monitoring both of those.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and just move on. So you may be wondering how you can actually change these permissions. So we can do that by using the chmod command, chmod, and then just typing in the octal notation we want. So for example, let's say I want to change my test file to be actually 644. So we can go 644. That's actually the current one. Let's make it 777, and then put test. So now as you can see, if we do list-l, we see that we have all permissions on this file. All right. Another way you can do this is you can say chmod, and then after put the like the identifier. So either user, group, or other, and then after do a plus or a minus for what you want to add. So if I want to add, if I want to subtract reading from the group, I can say g minus r test, and then now see the group can no longer read. There's no longer any r. All right, so those are two very simple ways. Chmod, if you're using that kind of the text-based one, it's kind of more just if you want to modify it. But then after, if you're using the octal notation, that's kind of more if you want to completely override it. So next up, let's actually create a user account for ourselves, because as I mentioned before, right, we don't want to be consistently running as root. It leads you to a lot of security vulnerabilities. If you accidentally run something, you might accidentally delete stuff, right? So the best way is to actually create your own user. So we can go ahead and do that, actually just typing add user, and then after type in your username. So for example, my name is David, so I'll just put David there. It's going to ask me for password, so let's just set this to like 123 ABC, and put in my full name. Now these fields are optional, but I generally like to put them. And then we're good. So now we have a user called David. Now, if I go ahead and just try to log in now, this is the IP address. So now you can see that it looks pretty good. However, let's say that I want to do something as a root user, right? So for example, the root user, right, can, oh, that's wrong. The user can list /root, right? But let's see if I can list /root now. I can't, right? I don't have permission because I'm no longer root. So what I can do now is whenever I want to run a command as root, I want to type sudo list/root. So this will run it as a root user, but you'll see there's a problem here. Oh, sorry, wrong password. You'll see David is not in the sudoers file. This incident will be reported. This is because whenever you create a user, obviously not all users should have permission to run stuff as root, right? So just as you need to add a user to an administrator account in Windows, that's the same thing in Linux here. Now it's slightly different for every single distro, but for Ubuntu, what you want to do is you want to add the user to the sudo group. So we can go ahead and do that just by typing user mod -ag, capital G, sudo, and then David, or whatever your username is. So what this does is it modified the user, it appended a group sudo to David. All right. So, so what we can do here now is if we just go ahead and exit and just connect again. Sorry, not local terminal. SSH root David at oops, this guy right here. Copy that. Log back in now. You'll see that if I type sudo list/root now, I will have sudo permissions. So, yay, now I can list it. All right, so that's basic usage of sudo. This is the recommended way to administer your system, is to use sudo. All right, so make sure that you are in the sudo group for yourself. For other people you don't trust or something, or if you're just creating for friends, make sure they don't have sudo. That's the default, so you shouldn't worry about that. All right, so now we're going to just follow the rest of this tutorial, this workshop with a David user or whatever local user you have created, just to kind of show you best practices. Okay, so so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over some common things that you might want to do to manipulate files in Linux. So the first thing, I actually did this very earlier, is using touch. So what touch does is allows you to create an empty file. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of this? Well, some programs will actually use kind of files as a way that you can configure them. You might want to give someone a permission only to a file. So for example, like a text document or something, but you need to first create it before you can set permissions on it, right? So you might want to just touch the file so it's blank and then give them permissions. So those are just some of the methods. There are a lot of other reasons you might want to use touch, but we can go ahead and just use touch, type in touch, and then type in the file name. So let's just say test. Let's just say test. All right. So another thing about Linux is that it's not really dependent on file extensions. For Mac and Windows, right? If you have a .txt folder or whatever, it'll automatically open with the text editor. In Linux, you can still do that, but most of the time, the text extension is just for your use so that you know what type of file it is. All right, so we can touch it. If we want to actually just write something, we can do nano and then put a file name. So let's say test2. This is a very basic text editor. Let's go ahead and type stuff. Then when you're done, just hit Control X, then say click Y, and then just write it out. All right, so that's nano. It's a very simple editor. We also have Vi, but this is a lot more complex. But yeah, we're not going to really go over that. But generally, touch and nano are going to be your main ways to create text documents. Another thing you might want to do is move files. You can do that by using the mv command. This is also how you rename files. Okay, so in Linux, renaming a file is kind of just moving a file to a new file name. So if we go ahead and just want to rename test, for example, to try, we'll just put in test, and then we'll put try. So now if we list it, we have a file named try instead of test. If we want to copy it, which means that we don't delete the original copy, we can go ahead and just type copy, cp, and then say try and try2. So now we have two identical copies of a file named try. Now, if you were to copy a directory, for example, let's just make a directory called test1. And you want to copy everything inside. What you need to do is actually you need to type copy-r, cp-r, test1, and then after your destination. So for example, test2. Oh, I'm going to create it. Oh, we already have one, sorry. test2-dir. All right, so now we just copy that directory. Now, if you want to remove a directory that is empty, this directory must be empty. You can type rmdir and test2-dir. If you want to remove the directory and everything inside of it, what you want to type is rm-r. So -r usually means recursive, so that means it goes down to everything else. So we just rm-r, for example, test1, and that works. Now, generally, you want to make sure that you're actually removing the directory you want, because again, it won't ask you for any confirmation. So the last one again is list. We've already used this quite a bit, but there are a few more powerful features. If you use -lah, this is actually generally what I type whenever I want to list a directory. You can see that it actually gives you a lot of information. First, it gives you the permissions. It gives you the total file size that you listed. It gives you the user and the group. And then also gives you the file size as well as the last time modified. All right, and then files will be in green and then directories will be in blue. So that's a very useful one. Now, something really cool about Linux is that it has something called man. So man is actually short for manual. So this will actually let you get help on command. So instead of having to search it on Google or something, most programs come with a man page. So if we just go ahead and type man and then the name of the command, so for example, ls, it'll open up a viewer here, and we can actually see all of the options that we can use. So first it gives us a really short just intro about what the command is, and then we can see all of the arguments and flags that we can use. So we can see that -a stands for all files, /l here stands for long listing format, all right, and then after h stands for human readable. So that means that it shows sizes with gigabytes instead of just bytes. Another thing to note about Linux directories is that, or anything honestly, is if you have a dot, it implicitly implies that it's supposed to be hidden. So if you don't put list-a, then it won't be shown, right? So for example, if I touch a file called .test, if I just list it, it's not there. I actually need to type list-a, and then it'll show the .test file. All right, so this is really useful for configuration files or something. So those are the basic kind of file manipulation commands. Now, James, do you want to kind of go over how you can install programs on this Linux thing?
Yep, sure. All right, so in Windows, usually when you install a program, you kind of go to the website of the program and you download it. And you would use an installer and install it. But Linux is different. So sometimes you can still do that with Linux, but most programs in Linux, and especially Ubuntu, are installed with something called a package manager. So a package manager is kind of a database of all of the programs available for your system, and it lets you install these things really easily, and it runs all of the scripts instead of needed, and it kind of just does this all together. So the one we use in Ubuntu most commonly is called apt. So apt is a package manager for Ubuntu that lets you not only install software, but also update the system. Now, for example, you can do, if you scroll up all the way to the top of the page, you'll see that there's a prompt for how 46 updates can be installed immediately, and 23 of these updates are security updates. And to see these additional updates, you can run apt list -- upgradable. So that is an example of the apt package manager right there. So once you run that command, it contacts the apt package manager to list all of the updates that you can install for your system. And to install these, you would run apt upgrade. And as David shows here, you have to run these as sudo to make sure that you run this as root. So a normal user can't just install programs and install updates either. Now over here, it'll tell you all of the packages that will be upgraded and the new packages that will be installed, and then how much space each of these will take and how much disk space will be used by all of this. So to continue, just type yes or Y and press enter, and it will install all of these. So most servers have pretty fast internet connection, so this shouldn't take too long. And if it does, we can always just cancel it and move on because, yeah. Okay, so we don't really need to install all of these updates just yet. So this is a great time to showcase how to stop a program in Linux. So to stop any program in Linux, you can press Control-C and that will terminate it. Yep, and then you can see that apt upgrade just stopped. So we're not going to update the system just yet. As you can see, that takes quite a long time. Instead, we're going to install 2 pieces of software. We're going to install Apache 2, which is a really common web server, and PHP 7, which is the runtime for the PHP library.
So the name of those packages is Apache 2 and also libapache 2-mod-php.
Yep, so that installs those 2 things. Then again, you'll press yes. Then as you can see back there, it's scrolled through a whole bunch of prerequisites. So a lot of the programs you install in APT will have programs they depend on that they will install automatically when you install the one you want. So as you can see, when we installed Apache 2 and especially libapache 2 mod PHP, that is the Apache plugin for PHP. But you can see that it also installed PHP 7.4 automatically because that's a dependency of the package. So now you can see that Apache 2 and PHP and the Apache PHP plugin are all installed. And now you can move on to removing these. So if there's any package that you don't want, you can use the apt remove command. So any command, any package that you install with the install command, you can use the same package name to remove it. So sudo apt install links, that's just an example software. Once that installs, if you suddenly realize that you don't want that, you can just type in apt remove links. However, when you do apt remove, it only removes the program files, but it doesn't remove the configuration files. So if you would like to remove the configuration files, what you have to do is do apt purge. Apt purge erases all files related to this program, including configuration files. So this is so there's different uses for this, right? There's cases where you might want to maintain your configuration, but just reinstall the program. So there you would use remove and purge based on your needs.
Yeah.
So now, David, if you want to explain ports and firewalls.
Yeah. So one more thing, actually, just for the APT, is that you'll see here, when you remove some programs, it actually will not remove the dependencies unless a program is dependent on the program you just removed. So for example, I still have these 2 dependencies that's going to still take up space. And a lot of times, these dependencies are actually what use up the most space. So what we want to do is actually want to do apt auto remove, which will actually get rid of any dangling packages. All right. So now we should be completely, our system should basically be reset to the state before we even install links at all. So now we're kind of going to move on to the second half of this, which is the networking part of our workshop. Let's go ahead and secure a server, because right now what happens is if we run any sort of program that's going to listen for any sort of network activity, anyone is going to be able to access it. And that's not what we want, right? So Ubuntu actually has a built-in firewall. It's called UFW. It's actually like it's not really a firewall, but it's a really nice wrapper for a firewall called IP tables. So we can go ahead and just UFW status here, and you'll say, make sure you run this as root. As you can see, it's currently inactive. So let's go ahead and add a few things. Now I'm just going to type them out and then explain them later. So let's allow 22. Let's allow 80. Let's also allow 443. So what these numbers are is there's something called ports. So you can kind of think of ports as like if a server was a house, a port would be like a window or like a door or something where you can transfer information. So different programs listen on different ports for activity, right? You can imagine that'd be super confusing if all programs just listened on one address, right? Like then you wouldn't know which program you're contacting. So we have ports. Kind of like you put the name of the person that you're writing mail to, you don't just put the address, right? So in this case, SSH runs on port 22. HTTP, so that's like the quote unquote unsecure, well, it is insecure, the hypertext transfer protocol, that is on 80. And then the secure version, HTTPS, is 443, okay? Now there are a lot of more common ports. 3389 is for remote desktop on Windows. 8080 is a alternate port for web servers. 587 is for webmails, right? There's a lot of ports. So you'll get to know those whenever you're configuring any application. But for our purposes, all we need is 22 for SSH, 80 for regular HTTP, as well as 443 for HTTPS. So now we can go ahead and just enable this now. So now, as you can see, we can no longer, our firewall is on. So what we can test this with is, let's go ahead and just say sudo ufw deny 80. So now if we go here and we just go ahead and try to access this IP address, you'll see that it doesn't load, right? So, but if we go ahead and say sudo ufw allow 80, then you can see it loads up immediately. All right, so if you want to segment your stuff or you want to just protect from random people being able to access your server, you can use a firewall. So now let's actually set up Apache 2. So Apache 2 is our web server, right? That's what's going to be sending these, responding to these requests by people. And now your web root. So this is basically the files that the web server will serve. That's by default in /var/www/html. So if we just go over there, we can see that we have an index.html. If we just go ahead and use nano to check it out, we can see that this actually kind of looks like the title of the page that we were served, right? We have the Apache 2 Ubuntu default page, and that's exactly what we have here. All right. So we can go ahead and, of course, add this editor website here. If you guys participated in our HTML and CSS thing, you'll kind of know a workshop. You'll kind of know how to create a simple web page. So just a reminder here. So as you can see here, I actually had a permission denied error. This is because all files inside this web root are actually owned by the server. They're not owned by regular users, right? So if we actually go ahead and say list-lah, we can see that it's actually owned by root and not by David. So what we want to do is we want to use sudo and rm index.html. So now let's just actually make a file now called index.html. Let's just create a quick little website just to say hi. Okay, so now we can see that that's everything. We don't need to reload anything. Whenever you make a request, the web server automatically gets the latest version. So now if we read this, we have hello and hello there. All right, so that's the basic thing. Now, as you can see here, Chrome says that this is not secure. So how can we fix this? Well, you'll have to fix this by getting a domain name. Now, domain names are part of something called the DNS system. So this allows you to translate names to IP addresses. James, do you want to go a little more in detail about how DNS kind of works?
Yeah, sure. So you'll see right now here that we have something called an IP address, right? So 172.105.107.197, and that's something that's really hard to remember, right? Like if you think about it, if we want to go to google.com or apple.com, we just know it's apple.com and google.com. So behind apple.com and google.com, there's also an IP address just like this, but there's something called a domain name system that keeps track of all of these addresses and maps them to a domain name. So every time you go to somewhere, you go to a website using like a domain name, which is like something using text, like not a straight IP address, your computer actually sends a request to a DNS server and the server will return to you the IP address your computer should contact instead. So it's kind of like a shortcut. So to set up HTTPS, we need something called a domain name, and you can get one for free by using the MLH pack from domain.com, and I don't remember the code, but it should
2020.
be, yeah, summer 2020, I think, right?
So if you guys head over to domain.com here, you'll be able to just see this, just create an account and log in, and then you can go ahead and just click purchase domain here. And then let's go, what's a cool little name? I'm actually
Massey is awesome.
We're restricted though. We're restricted for okay, let's just go ahead and say Wow, this is kind of hard actually.
Hackengerhunt.com.
No, they're only aren't they? Oh, they're taught. Isn't it .tech, .space, and
No,
.online?
no, it's .com. It's only .com.
What? I thought it was only .space, .tech, and
No,
.online.
no, they changed. It's .com only. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, all right. Let's just say MasseyHacks is awesome. So if you just wait, domain.com is a little bit slow. Okay, apparently I want. Okay, that's weird. Okay, let's just go from where we get started.
Oh wait, no, it is .space, .tech, and .online.
Yeah. Okay. So we just go ahead and go to your hacker resources, and you go over here to MLH. You can go ahead and just open this link, and it's domain.com. So if you just register, go here. Yes. Okay. So let's just say MasseyHacks is going to space. All right. Let's search that. All right. Look, it's there. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to just do this for 1 year because our coupon code is only valid for 1 year. And continue. And then just go ahead and proceed to building. You don't need to worry about any of this. Okay, so now what you want to do is put in your discount code, summer 2020, not 29.29. This should give you 100% off. All right, so just fill that all in. You'll probably also need a payment method just to tie that to your account. But again, they will not charge you. All right, so now that you have your domain here, I'm just going to go pull up one of the domains that I already have. I'm not going to waste this. Just going to take forever to load. Wow, they're probably getting swamped today. It is a hackathon weekend. There are a few going on, I suppose. Dude, what the heck? Oh boy, this is actually golden. This is actually too good. You guys can't see that. This is what's going on right now.
Yeah, so unfortunately, domain.com is being a bit laggy today. But what we wanted to demonstrate to you was like how to kind of assign your IP address to your domain using something called an A record. So David, if you want to kind of explain a bit more about what we're going to do next.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is so we're going to actually change something called the zone. So our zone is actually that information that the DNS server has to be able to reply to these requests. So if we want to just do a basic kind of www to our IP address, we can use something called an A record. Oh gosh. All right, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and log into an alternative DNS provider here. Here at MasseyHacks, we use something called Cloudflare. They're a web security company, and they also provide DNS hosting services. So you don't need to use the DNS services from your domain provider, especially if it takes you 5 minutes to log in. But I'm sure that's just for this weekend. They're just having a little bit of trouble. But I'm going to go ahead and just log in here to our Cloudflare account. Okay. So here we have a Cloudflare account. So I am at my-site.online. So if you remember, that was one of the domains that we had registered. If we just go ahead and go to the DNS zone page here, what we can see is we have a record. So this points to an IP address. And then after we use so then the server responds with the IP address. So then after your client will then go to that IP address. So what we can go ahead, oh, yay, it finished. All right, but anyway, so what we can go here is we can create add record, and we can go ahead and put in a record. So for example, if I didn't have this, we just go ahead and delete these records here. All right, and then we just go ahead and say so this is for just my-site.online, and let's just put it to our Linode address. So that is going to be this guy. And then I'm just going to turn off this status, okay? Generally, you won't have this, okay? But this is something unique to Cloudflare, okay? So I'm just going to try to simulate what it would be like without Cloudflare. And then what we can do is we have something called the Cname Record. So Cname Record is basically like an alias. So it says, okay, whatever you have here at www, it's the same as my-site.online. So if we have this www now, I'm again going to turn off Cloudflare for this record here. We save this. Now, you'll see that we can now point to this. So if we go to my-site.online, you'll see that now it says the hello there, right? It's the same as if we were to register here. But you can see here, again, it's not secure, right? So what we can do is use something called Let's Encrypt to get a free SSL certificate. So SSL certificates are the way that browsers can communicate with your site in a secure manner by encrypting your communication. So what we can do is we can go ahead and just look up these instructions. We can go to certbot.org, and we are running Apache on Ubuntu 20.04. So now this gives you really simple instructions here. All we need to do is just copy and paste these commands into our SSH terminal. So let's just paste these in. All right, it seems like we already have all this. Might not have the universe directory, we don't yet. Okay, and let's just update that. And then let's install CertBot. So this is a program that will automatically issue you SSL certificates. So if we go ahead and just go there and yes. All right, so now it's installing CertBot. So you might see that this is actually apt-get. So apt and apt-get are basically the same thing. So you can use either one, but apt is the kind of the more user-facing one. It gives you like cool progress bars and stuff. All right, so now let's go ahead and run certbot. All we need to do is say sudo certbot --Apache. So now we're going to enter an email address. So I'm just going to put, let's say, open source at MasseyHacks.ca. Now we're going to say hello at MasseyHacks.ca. And just agree to the terms of service. And go ahead and just, it doesn't matter if you want a yes or no. We're just going to click no for now. And now it's going to ask us to enter our domain names. So the first one we want is, of course, my-site.online. But we also want www.my-site.online. So we also want to just type that in as well. Now you have an unlimited amount, but remember that you need to have a record pointing to your server. Otherwise, certbot will not be able to verify that you actually own this domain. All right, so let's just go ahead and just type that in. All right, so as we can see, we actually got okay, we actually got we passed the verification, so we can go ahead and just choose one of these. So let's go ahead and just choose number 2 here. And then just say redirect. So this will automatically send people who are on HTTP to HTTPS. So now this will automatically reload Apache. And then after, we can go ahead and just go over here. And you can see it still will not be secure, but now we just reload it and then it'll be secure now. So we can see that we have a certificate and it's valid. And then all you need to do is every 3 months, just run certbot renew. And then after, it'll renew your certificates. All right, so remember that these do expire 3 months is the expiry time. Just run certbot renew. They'll actually also send you an email when it's about to expire as well. Okay, so that's how you get set up with HTTPS. Now we just have a few final things we want to cover about Linux. These just like miscellaneous things that we couldn't really fit in this general kind of way of setting up a website. So the first thing we want to go over is piping. So you may notice, so for example, let's go ahead and just say like echo. So just echo hello has it say hello, right? But let's say I want to send that input to another program. What I can do is I can use something called the pipe. So what this is it links the output of one program into the input of another one. So before we do that, let's actually go cat. This is out of order. Whoops. So one of the things you might want to use is cat. So cat basically prints out the contents of a file. So if we have like cat index.html, we see it gives us everything inside that HTML file. So if we go ahead and say cat index.html, and let's pipe this output into, let's say less. So less is a program that actually lets you kind of scroll through output. So if I go ahead and cat, for example, our system log, which is at /var/log/syslog, it's going to be super long, right? It's gigantic. So what we can do is we can pipe this into less. So now we can see that we can actually slowly scroll through this with our spacebar and actually see everything that's going on. All right, so that's piping. It's just basically putting the output of a program into the input of another, and you use a pipe. I'm pretty sure this is just called a pipe. It's the thing above your backslash. Oh, your forward slash, sorry. So yeah, that's cat and less. Another thing is Systemctl. So Systemctl allows you to actually manage the services. So for example, let's say I want to stop Apache. What I can do is I can say sudo systemctl stop Apache 2. Right, so Systemctl allows you to kind of manage your services. Let's go just grab the status of Apache now. We can see it's dead, it's stopped, exited. We can go ahead and start it. Right, so generally any server that you have will have a systemd configuration, which will allow you to control it through Systemctl. Another thing that you might have seen just me doing right now is /var/log. So remember that /var is where we have these variable files, right, that depend on the system, right? It's unique to the system. /var/log is usually where logs are kept, right? Like you can see, right? What if Apache runs into an error? Where does it show you? It doesn't print it to the console, right? It prints it to a log file. So for example, in here, we have Apache 2. We need to be actually root here. So it's sudo list /var/log/Apache 2. We can see that we have access, error, and other vhost access, right? So the access log is just a log of people, like if they're visiting a website, right? Every time you visit the website, it'll write into the log file. If it's an error, it'll go into the error file. So we can go ahead and actually just read this with cat error.log, sorry, /var. And we can see that there are a few errors, but these aren't really errors. They're just kind of stopping and starting Apache. So that's /var/log. We also have auth.log, which is showing you, is it not var? Oh.
No, you need to cat the log.
Oh, yeah. Auth.log. So this shows you any authentication attempts. So if you kind of feel like someone may have logged in, you can actually look to see who logged in. We also have syslog, which I showed you, which is just the system log. So any program that isn't logging to its own file or any system information from Linux itself will get printed to syslog. So that's actually a great kind of way that we can segue into tail. So tail, what that allows you to do is actually view the last n amount of lines, right? So if I'm looking at auth.log, right, or especially syslog, I don't want to look at what happened like 5 days ago, right? I only want to see what happened a few minutes ago. So we can just use /sudo tail. Sorry, we can use sudo tail and just put in the /syslog. And this will only show the last, I believe, 10 or 20 lines. But we can actually change that if we just give it the end flag and say -n and say 100. So again, right, this is really useful if you just want to see the last of it, because less, right, it goes from the top. You need to scroll down all the way. We can just use tail. And another really useful thing is tail-f. So what this does is this will actually follow the file. So if new things are added, it'll actually add that to your output.
So maybe if you do auth.log.
Yeah, sure. Okay, if you want to try to log in, that works.
Yep.
So right, auth.log, if we just want to, even if you just log
So
in.
if I make like a malicious login attempt, you'll see right there that there's an authentication failure.
Right.
Someone from this IP address tried to log in, but I don't know the password to David's account. So it shows up in the log here that there was a failed login attempt.
All right.
And if I do another one, you'll see that it pops up again.
Yeah, all right. So this is a great way, especially if you're debugging something, to just have that log file open. All right. Another thing I want to do is, so kind of related to piping is redirection, right? So output redirection. So let's say I want to save the output of a very long output into a file, right? So for example, this is completely useless, but let's say I want to cat syslog, or let's say I want to tail the last n lines, last 100 lines of syslog, and save them to a file. So now what I can do is I can use this arrow key right here, that's greater than sign, and then I can put the name of the text file that I wanted to save it as. So if I want to just save it as, for example, the last syslog. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong directory. Last syslog. Now what we can see here is that we don't get an output, but we can go ahead and just look at the syslog. This will be the last 100 lines, right? Now, if we just use this one arrow, it'll overwrite the file every single time. So if we want to append to this file, we just add another arrow, and now this will append. So if you look here now, this will be 200 lines instead of just 100 lines long, right? But if I just use one arrow, again, if we look over here, it says 100 lines instead of 200 or 300, right? And the final thing we want to go over now, just as kind of we're running out of time, is actually how to reboot and stop your server. So if you want to reboot your server, you just sudo reboot. This will reboot the server. If you want to halt the server or stop the server, you just type sudo halt. And then if you want to look at processes, so your task manager, you can use top. All right, but a really nice one is called htop. You can go ahead and just install that. It should be pre-installed, but some distributions it's not, and it gives you a much more cool looking task manager. All right, so that's kind of all we have prepared for you guys today. So we hopefully now you guys kind of understand how a Linux server works and how you can set up your own web server. James, do you have anything else to add?
We don't really have time to go through this today, but I would highly suggest everyone here to look into SSH public key authentication. So that's kind of like at a very quick glance, it's authenticating using a file. So that's much more secure than authenticating using a password, because the details you contain on your like private key file can be so much more longer and complicated than your password, and that's extremely important if you're running like mission critical software on your server, or you have like databases of passwords or personal user information that you don't want hackers to easily access, because passwords are so much easier to guess, especially if it's one that's made up of dictionary words or that one you came up with yourself.
Yeah, so that's something that you can look into. That's definitely something you should look into, especially if you're running a production system. But yeah, that should be it, guys. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. And we hope that you have a fun time at the rest of this event. If you guys have any questions, of course, feel free to ask us in Discord. We're always happy to help you guys out, setting up a server or whatever. If you have a question, we will hopefully have an answer. So yeah, bye-bye. I don't really know. Yeah, bye.
Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yep. Let me just stop this. And